This happened in 2017, when I was working as a technician at a private research facility outside of Duluth, Minnesota. The building looked pretty ordinary from the outside. It was much older than it appeared, though. Over decades, they had added sections and renovated parts of it, and one of the strangest features is what was beneath it. The building had 2 sub-level basements. Most employees only ever went down to the first one, which held storage rooms, electrical panels, and mechanical equipment. My job, however, involved maintaining a very specific piece of lab machinery that had been installed in sub-basement 2, the lowest level of the building. Almost no one ever went down there. The hallway was narrow and the ceiling was crowded with pipes, and the fluorescent light hummed constantly. It was quite annoying, actually, the noise. Access to that room was restricted because the equipment was so expensive and sensitive, and I had the only physical key to the lab. Even my supervisor had to call me if anything needed to be checked. Inside the room was a machine I maintained, a metal desk, a few cabinets, and an old wired landline phone bolted to the wall. It was there in case someone working late underground couldn't get cell reception and needed to call for help. I used to stay late pretty often, but not that night. That evening, I finished work around 6 and drove back to my apartment on the other side of town, roughly 10 miles away. I remember eating dinner, watching TV for a while, and eventually falling asleep somewhere before midnight. But a few hours later, I woke up to my phone ringing. The screen said it was my girlfriend Maya, and I answered groggily. She was crying. She could barely get words out. "Why did you do that? Why did you scare me like that?" I sat up in bed confused. What are you talking about?" Between sobs, she finally explained. A minute earlier, she had received a call from a number she didn't recognize. Since it was late, she almost ignored it, but part of her thought I could be calling from work. And when she answered, she said there was silence at first, and then a slow, quiet voice repeating her name. "Maya, Maya." She said the voice sounded just like mine, but the tone was flat and drawn out, and there was this constant crackling in the background. She kept asking where I was and what I was doing, but the voice just kept saying her name over and over. Eventually, the line started breaking apart in bursts of static, until it faded out completely, and that's when she called me. At first, I assumed it was a prank call or some strange glitch, but then she told me the number that had called her. It looked strangely familiar, and I asked her to send me a screenshot on her call log. When it came through, the number listed was that of the landline in sub-basement 2. Remember, the phone is inside the locked lab, which only I have a key to. I told her it must be just a glitch with the phone system, but she kept insisting the voice sounded like me. Next morning, of course, I went early into work and went straight downstairs to investigate, but everything looked normal. The lab door was untampered. Everything was locked up, and nothing appeared disturbed, and the phone hung on the wall the way it always had. Out of curiosity, I picked up the receiver and checked the redial function. The last outgoing call had been placed at 4:17 a.m. to my girlfriend's number. I don't have an explanation to this, but the part that has always bothered me the most is that if someone really made the call from the lab, they would have been alone in a locked room in the lowest level of the basement in the middle of the night, with no way to escape. When I was a kid, my family and I went for a walk on the beach during midwinter. Halfway through the walk, it started blizzarding fiercely, and we decided to head back to the car. On the way back to the car park, my brothers and I were complaining of being tired, hungry, and thirsty. But my dad, who was born and raised in the area, assured us there was nowhere to buy food and drink anywhere near that particular beach. However, as we battered through the whiteout towards the car park, a building loomed out of the blizzard. It was a strange building, like an annex to a 60s/70s modern comprehensive school. People from the UK will know what style I mean, and squeezed in between 4 hedgerows atop the spine of a long flat sand dune, as though it was there first and the ancient haggard hedges had somehow grown up around it. Outside was a sandwich board advertising hot drinks and snacks, so we bundled in. The place was packed. There must have been 4 or 5 dozen tables, and every single one was heaving with pensioners eating tea, toast, tea cakes, and soup. When we arrived, there were no other cars in the car park, and the nearest bus stop in the village was at the end of the track a good few miles away, so goodness knows where all these old people had come from. The room itself was very strange. The tables and chairs were all mismatched and arranged around glass display cases on podiums filled with mouldering taxidermied specimens of local wildlife, except many of the examples were either creatures who lived nowhere near the area, like hedgehogs, badgers or voles, or animals that aren't native or, at any rate, very rare to the area, cormorants, avocates and plovers, etc. At the centre of the room was a squared-off spiral staircase leading to the upstairs, which, despite having no curtain visible from the outside and being in the middle of the day in a bright white snowstorm, was pitch dark. I mean so dark, we couldn't even see the top of the staircase banister. We sat down and my dad went off to get us some food. The oddest thing is that even at that age I remember looking at the prices on the walls and being very confused because they were all in old money, with prices in halfpennies, sixpence and shillings. It was an open pass kitchen and all the equipment behind it looked very retro, as did all the clothes of the women happily working behind the counter. When my dad came back with the food, he couldn't stop talking about how amazingly cheap it was, and how the woman who served him spoke to him using ultra-specific regional dialect terms he thought had completely died out decades ago. He said it was like being a schoolboy at the tuck shop again. We ate our very generous and very delicious tea cakes and hot chocolate, and got our coats, hats, gloves, scarves, and walked back out into the still raging blizzard. The whole time we were there, not a single other person entered or left, despite many tables clearly having finished eating before we'd even arrived. We battled back to the car, and with much difficulty maneuvered it back onto the track to the main road and head home. In the years to come, we visited that beach many, many times again. The building, though, was never there. Not only was it not there were no signs that it had ever been there. No rubble, no ruin, no foundation, not even the ancient-looking hedges that it seemed to have squeezed itself inside of. Due to the beach being jutting out into a major shipping channel, the area has been fastidiously mapped for centuries. Using my student historical archive access, I studied maps of the area from roughly every decade right back to the early 19th century, and according to them, there was never any building on that site. Now it's easy to think as I've grown older, I've become confused as to which beach we visited. But as I said before, my dad, who was born and raised there, knew exactly which beach we were on. And the beach itself is very, very distinctive. A very thin, long, teardrop split of sand extending across a river estuary mouth. I know it must have been that beach, because I remember seeing the red warning beacon at the top of the suspension bridge crossing the estuary blinking throughout the blizzard. The place didn't exist, had never existed. I ate tea cakes and drank hot chocolate with my family, in a place that simply never was there. In 2003, shortly after I started teaching computer lab as a block class, I was standing in my doorway talking with a very gifted third grade student, as we often did. That day's topic was really long words. I told him about one I learned at a fairly young age, anti-disestablishmentarianism. He was fascinated and asked what it meant, so we spent some time breaking down the word into its prefixes and suffixes, root word, etc., to get to the meaning. By this time my next class was arriving, so he said goodbye and went on his way. As the next class sat down, I gave them their first instruction, which involved navigating to the school website. Well, This was that time in internet history where some people/organizations and corporations were buying up similar websites with different domain suffixes, so if you accidentally typed in, for example, instead of .com, .net, instead of a dead page or error, you got a completely different website that you expected, now owned by these often unscrupulous people. For example, during this time, if you were to go to whitehouse.com instead of .gov, you would go to a rather interesting site that under 18s definitely shouldn't have accessed. Other sites were less malicious, just ad sites, offering the option to buy the domain you typed in. But back to the kids. And as always happened, one kid accidentally typed in a .com instead of a .net on the web search for the school district. This had happened before, and our district was one of those that resulted in an ad website, listing similar domains and their availability. But today was a little different. I looked at the student screen, and before I could correct the address, I did a double take. There on the screen was the exact transcript of the conversation I'd just had with my third grader. And when I say exact, I mean word for word, including all the ums and ahs and you knows. Internally, I kind of freaked out. Didn't show it outwardly, but I immediately changed the website to the school district, like I needed to get it off the screen as quickly as humanly possible. Then I had a minute to think it over. So I went back to that student's computer and went back to the .com address to see it again. Only just as quickly it was gone. It made me regret not having the forethought to grab one of our digital cameras and take a picture. To this day, I still have no idea how it happened, but I've always had the feeling I got a peek behind a curtain we don't even know exists. Back in 2011, when we were all around 16, my friend Dylan lived outside a small farm town near Ashland, Wisconsin. His family owned a few acres surrounded by empty fields and thick lines of pine trees. Behind their house sat an old hunting cabin then converted into our weekend hangout spot. It wasn't really a cabin anymore. Dylan's dad had fixed it up with electricity, a small wood stove, a fridge, a TV hooked up to an old game console, and 4 sets of bunk beds stacked along the walls. We basically treated it like our own clubhouse. Every Friday night, we'd pile in there, play games, eat junk food, and stay up late. Well, one night late in October, a few of us were hanging out in the cabin while the wind rattled the trees outside, and it was already dark. At some point I realized I had to pee. The bathroom in Dylan's house was technically closer, but none of us ever bothered walking inside. I pushed open the cabin door and stepped out into the cold. To explain the layout, when you walked out of the cabin, the house sat off to the left about 30 yards away. That area was lit by a porch light and a motion light over the driveway. To the right, we always parked our cars along the edge of a gravel strip. Past the cars was nothing but an open field that eventually faded into a line of trees. The porch light from the house lit the space between the cabin and the cars pretty well, but just past the last vehicle, the light dropped off sharply into the darkness. I stepped out and started walking to the right, planning to go behind the cars where it was darker. And that's where I stopped. Standing next to the last car was Dylan's older brother Marcus, just staring. Marcus was about 20 at the time, and sometimes hung out with us for a bit before going back into the house. I figured he must have stepped out for some air, but something about the way he stood there made me pause. He wasn't looking towards the cabin or the house, but the field, just staring straight into the darkness beyond the cars. The wind moved through the trees, and when I moved towards him, Marcus didn't react at all or acknowledge me. And I stood there for a moment watching him, and watching what he was watching. Then he began walking. Slowly he moved past the cars. For a moment the porch light hit him clearly. He was wearing a grey hoodie and black jeans, with his hands stuffed into his pockets. I remember that detail specifically because it stuck with me later. He continued walking until he reached a couple of thin trees near the edge of the light. Then he stepped behind them and was eaten away by darkness. I figured he'd just gone further out into the field. Maybe it was to smoke something. It felt a little weird that he hadn't said anything though, but whatever. I took care of my business quickly and went back to the cabin. Everyone was still there, sitting around the table playing cards, and Dylan was dealing. Marcus was sitting a few feet away in a folding chair sipping a drink. For a moment, my brain couldn't process it. I looked at him and back at Dylan. "Hey, what's your brother doing out by the cars?" Dylan looked up. "What do you mean?" "I just saw him out there. He walked past the cars towards the field." "Dude, I've been in here," Marcus said. I laughed awkwardly, thinking he was messing with me. No, you weren't. I literally just saw you in grey hoodie and black jeans." Marcus slowly lifted his arm and looked down at himself. He was wearing a grey hoodie and black jeans. A couple of the guys started joking about it, but I suddenly felt this tight feeling in my stomach. "There's no back door," I said. "The only way in here is through the door I just came through, right?" As I had been standing in the doorway the whole time after coming back in. Marcus hadn't walked past me, he hadn't come behind me, and no one had opened the door since I returned. Everyone went quiet for a few moments, and then Dylan finally said, "You're screwing with us, right?" But I wasn't. The thing that still bothers me isn't just that I saw someone who looked exactly like Marcus, is that I was staring at him for a good 10 seconds. I don't really know what to make of all of this. This is something a close friend of mine told me years ago, and it's always stuck with me. It happened to his uncle when he was a kid around 10 years old, in a very small rural town in Australia. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. There were no traffic lights or supermarkets, and barely any paved roads for that matter. Just houses, farmlands, and long stretches of empty highway. Having a car in that town was a luxury. Only a handful of people owned one, and because of that everyone knew whose car was whose. You could recognize them from a distance. One of those cars belonged to a man who used it every morning to drive to work. His route took him along a long, straight highway, more like a rural route than a proper road, cutting through open land. It wasn't completely deserted, but traffic was light, especially early in the morning. One day, like always, he left his house at 5 a.m. Nothing unusual happened. There was no strange behavior or indication that anything was wrong. He just got in his car and drove off. And at 7 a.m. his wife received a phone call. The person on the other end told her husband's car had been found on the side of the highway, the engine still running, doors closed, keys still in the ignition, but there was no sign of her husband. At first, people assumed there must be a logical explanation. Maybe he stepped away for help, maybe there was an incident nearby, but none of it added up. There were no skid marks, no damage to the car, no footprints leading away from it. And abandoning a running car like that made no sense, especially in a place where cars were rare and valuable. Before she could even process the call, she received another one. This time, she was told her husband had been found alive in another city. The city was roughly 960 kilometers away from where the car was discovered. He had been found wandering completely naked, confused and dehydrated, and barely able to speak. Authorities said he appeared disoriented, as if he had no idea where he was or how he got there. If you've ever driven long distances, you'll immediately understand how impossible this sounds. Even today, with modern highways and cars, that trip would take at least 9 hours of non-stop driving. Back then, with older vehicles and rougher roads, it would have taken much longer. There were no records of him buying fuel, no bus tickets, no witnesses who remember giving him a ride, and flying wasn't an option as commercial flights weren't accessible from that town, and even if they were, the cost alone would have ruled it out. How did he get there then? That was the question that haunted everyone. His wife used the same car, the one found abandoned and still functioning, to go and retrieve him. When she finally saw him, she said he looked like a different person, like something fundamental inside him had snapped. People tried asking him what happened, but he never answered. He refused to talk about the road, the time in between, or how he ended up hundreds of kilometers away. Any attempt to bring it up would cause him to panic or shut down completely. Over time, his mental state deteriorated. He became paranoid, withdrawn, and eventually lost touch with reality altogether and was committed to a psychiatric hospital. According to my friend, his uncle never spoke about that morning again, not to anyone. What gets me isn't just the distance or the time gap, it's the car left running, as if he had stepped out for just a second and never stepped back in. Almost like reality skipped him. I don't know if this was a glitch, missing time, or something else entirely, but every time I think about that empty car on the Australian highway still humming to itself in the early morning light, I get chills, and I can't help but wonder where he really went during those missing hours. This happened in my late 30s, and it's the creepiest experience I still can't explain. My husband, kids, and I were in the living room just hanging out watching TV and talking. I was sitting on the sofa, and something I can't remember what exactly fell off, so I went to pick it up. But as soon as I bent over, my foot touched the ground, and my hand was on the object. All three things were done at the exact same time. I was no longer in my living room or myself. I was stepping off a street curb, basically in the exact same position in what looked like a big city in the 20s or 30s. I looked down at myself, and from what I saw, I must have been a man, because I had on a suit with a long coat and expensive shoes and a hat. I have to dig up my journal because I wrote it all down, but I think I remember seeing this person's reflection in the water by the curb or a car's window. It's been a while, and it only lasted a few seconds. It felt like what broke the connection or whatever was when I stood up and I was back in my house. The thing is though, it was so vivid, so detailed. I could hear everything and it felt like I was there. I can still see it in my memory. I know this is absolutely impossible and makes no sense, but this is one of the creepiest things I have ever experienced. This happened in 2018, when I was staying over at my girlfriend Lena's parents' house outside of Boise, Idaho. We were in her living room watching TV, when I suddenly started feeling really nauseous and lightheaded. It hit me out of nowhere. One minute I felt fine, and the next I felt like I might pass out. Lena walked me into the kitchen so I could get some water. I remember leaning back against the counter while she hugged me, asking if I was okay. Then she pulled back and stared at me with a terrified look. She said my face had gone completely pale, almost grey, and kept touching my cheeks, saying my lips were turning purple. And that's when I noticed something strange. I couldn't feel my heart. I told her so. I reached up to check my pulse on my neck, and then everything went black. But instead of losing consciousness, I found myself elsewhere. I can't really describe it properly. It wasn't a room, nor was it outside. It was an empty space. But somehow I was standing and walking normally, and I wasn't alone. There were other people there with me. They looked like normal people, of different ages, wearing different clothes, and I could see their faces clearly. And they could see me too. No one spoke. We were just standing there in silence. Then in the distance, this bright bluish-white light appeared. It started faint, but quickly became incredibly bright, and somehow we all seemed to understand the same thing at the same time. We were supposed to walk towards it, and that we did. The closer we got, the more peaceful everything felt. I've never felt calm like that before. It was like every worry and fear I'd ever had just vanished. I remember thinking the light was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And then suddenly, something yanked me back hard. It was like something hooked me from behind and was dragging me away. The peaceful feeling disappeared instantly, and I felt this intense pulling sensation. The light started getting further away, and as I was pulled back I could hear a noise like static in the faint distance, which turned into a scream. And it was that moment the light vanished completely and I woke up on the kitchen floor. Lena's mum was doing CPR on me. She's a nurse and had apparently run in when she started screaming. Lena was in hysterics next to us. The scream I heard while being pulled away was from her. Apparently what happened was that right after I said I can't feel my heart, I passed out and fell onto her. She couldn't hold me up, so I hit the counter on my way down and crashed into some empty bottles on the floor. Her mum couldn't find her pulse, and after about a minute of CPR I came back. The weird part is that Lena told me that while I was unconscious, I was completely still but smiling. Then right before I stopped breathing, their 3 cats absolutely freaked out. They started hissing and howling and sprinting to the back door like something had scared them badly. One came back the next morning, but the other 2 were found later up a tree a few blocks away. At the hospital they ran a bunch of tests, and everything came back completely normal and the doctors couldn't explain what caused it. The reason I've always thought this more of a glitch than a near-death experience is one specific detail. When I first arrived in the empty place with the other people, they all looked at me for a moment, sort of confused, like I had shown up somewhere I wasn't supposed to be, only for me, of course, to then be pulled back. It all happened on my birthday, during a mountain bike race weekend. I was a 16-year-old male, and my friend, who was the same age, had gone out of town for a mountain bike race weekend. These races usually last 2 days. The first day is practice to learn the course. The second is the actual race. After practice, the 2 of us decided to grab some ice cream. About halfway through mine, I suddenly needed to use the restroom. The shop didn't have one, so I told my friend I'd check the hotel next door. It was a little strip mall, and it was around 5:30 in the afternoon. He followed. As soon as we stepped inside, the place felt strange. The air smelled musty, like an old carpet, and there was absolutely no one around. We couldn't see any workers or guests. On the front counter sat one of those little gold-waving cat statues. Its paw clicked rhythmically as it moved up and down, and that sound echoed through the empty lobby. That was it. We wandered for a little, asking to use the bathroom, but the place seemed abandoned. Finally, I gave up and started searching on my own. I noticed a restroom sign swaying slightly under one of the lights. I looked at my friend and said, "Well, looks like it's this way." He sat down on the couch on the lobby, and I walked down the hall. The buzzing lights overhead made the whole corridor feel lonelier the further I went. At the end, instead of restroom doors, I found a ballroom completely empty, except for music equipment on the stage. The floor had scattered lights shining on it, as if a party had just frozen in place, and overhead hung a static disco ball, its surface reflecting lights, but the beams didn't move. I looked around trying to find where the beams of light were coming from, but couldn't see the source. The whole scene felt frozen and unreal. When I turned to leave, I noticed something strange. A doorway leading into what looked like an Indian restaurant, but to the right, another set of open doors stood wide. Curiosity pulled me in, and the moment I stepped through, the smell hit me. It was sharp and chemical and unmistakably chlorine. But it wasn't the usual faint pool smell. It was strong, almost like choking or standing over an open bottle of cleaner fluid. Inside was an indoor pool that was perfectly still. The water was murky, its surface flat and untouched, reflecting the odd glow of 4 harsh lights in each corner of the room. The shadows they cast stretched unnaturally across the walls, blending and warping the space, until it didn't even feel like a real pool room anymore. Around the water, sun chairs sat in neat rows. They looked like they hadn't been touched in years, coated in a thin film of dust. The walls themselves were strange wood, like the fronts of little shops. The longer I stood there, the weirder I felt. It was like the chlorine-soaked air was pressing down my chest. Finally, I turned back. To the left was the ballroom I had just come from, but straight ahead the doorway into the Indian restaurant waited, so I chose that path instead. Curious, I walked in, figuring maybe that's where the bathrooms were. The red carpet crunched under my shoes like it hadn't been stepped on in years, and as soon as I stepped inside, I heard faint Indian music playing. It was soft and warped, almost like it was coming from a broken record machine. I couldn't tell where specifically it had come from. It added another layer to the strange, frozen feeling of that place. The restaurant only had booths around the edges and no tables or chairs in the middle, which I thought was weird. I circled the room, taking it all in. When I looked back towards the bar, I saw something I swear had not been there earlier. A hallway with a glowing sign that read "Bathrooms this way." I followed it and finally found the restaurant. As I walked, I thought about how perfect this place was for pictures. I love liminal spaces, and this was exactly the kind of eerie place that fascinates me. The restroom itself was nothing special. The light was dim, the mirror was cracked, and the paper towel dispenser hung crooked. I washed my hands and pushed the door open, ready to leave. The instant I opened it, the whole world shifted. I was hit with the smell of curry, strong and rich, like someone had just set a steaming dish in front of me, and at the same time I heard it, the sound of plates clinking, forks tapping against porcelain, and dozens of voices overlapping in chatter and laughter. The empty air I had walked through minutes earlier was suddenly alive with noise. My stomach dropped. I stepped in the hallway, and when I looked back into the restaurant, it was not the abandoned place I had entered anymore. Families sat in the booths, children laughing, eating naan, and the bar was packed with men talking to each other. Waiters weaved quickly between tables that had not even been there moments before. It just didn't make sense. Moments earlier, this place had looked forgotten, like no one had been here in years. Now it was warm and alive and full of energy. I couldn't explain it. Then my phone buzzed. It was my friend. "Bro, what's taking so long? I'm just about to leave you." I didn't even answer. I just wanted to get back. When I stepped back into the hallway, I glanced towards the pool room I'd seen earlier. My chest tightened when I realized it was no longer abandoned. The once murky water now rippled with movement as people splashed and shouted, their laughter bouncing sharply off the tiled walls. Trying to act normal, I left the restaurant and walked back towards the lobby. But when I stepped out, my stomach twisted even harder. It was dark outside. My friend was still standing by the couch, but he didn't just look annoyed, he looked terrified. His face was pale, his hands were shaking a little, and his eyes darted to me like he didn't believe what he was seeing. "Bro," he said in a voice. "Where the hell did you run off to? I was about to call the police. I blew up your phone. I called you like 10 times and you never answered. I even went looking for you, man. Where were you?" I don't know," I stammered, and I really didn't. The strangest part, now the lobby was not empty, people walked around with suitcases. The TV in the corner was playing news, and the woman at the front desk was smiling, receiving the newcomers. We walked out together, and I pulled out my phone to check the time. It was 8:50. Now I swear I had only been in there for maybe 5 minutes. I thought about taking pictures, but I could not. And after how strange it all felt, the restaurant changing, the time disappearing, my friend nearly calling the police because I had vanished, I didn't want to stick around. When I stepped into my car, I sat there for a while. The only light was the small overhead mirror light inside the car. And I looked through the glass doors of the hotel one last time, and noticed the little gold cat was gone. The drive back to our hotel was quiet and unsettling. I was so distracted by everything that had happened that I almost ran a red light. My heart was racing and I've never felt so confused. My friend barely spoke the entire way back. When we arrived, my parents were in our hotel room at a different location. My mum saw me and frowned. "What's wrong?" she asked. Her voice was soft but serious. "Nothing," I said quickly. "Just really tired from practice." I went straight to the shower and crawled into bed. But even lying there in the dark, I still don't know what really happened to me. The whole thing really creeped me out. Does anyone have an explanation for this? This happened back in 2010, when I was 15. I was on a family vacation where we visited the Biltmore estate in North Carolina. There were 11 of us on the trip, including my parents, my sister, my aunt, and her husband, and 3 kids and my grandparents. The estate was not where the incident in question happened, however. On our way home to the Biltmore, the adults decided it would be fun to visit the Omni Grove Park Inn. On the way, they told us that the hotel was haunted, so of course we were intrigued. When we arrived, the kids split off to explore the hotel and look for ghosts. We were running around taking pictures with our phones, trying to capture images of ghosts or orbs. Overall, things were uneventful, until we got the call to meet back in the lobby before we started the drive home. By this point, my cousins, my sister and I had all split into different groups, and I found myself with my cousin of 11, Jay. Jay and I somehow ended up on the 4th floor. We were on the balcony and could see our family down in the lobby, but our grandfather was not with them. He just so happened to be on the same floor as us. He was waiting by the elevator with a bunch of other people, and we wanted to take the stairs down instead of waiting for the next elevator. Our grandfather decided to follow us. Now this was an open staircase that went directly down into the lobby. We were on the 4th floor, so we expected to come down at least 3 flights of stairs. This is where things started getting freaky. The stairs kept continuing after 3 flights. It felt like 10 minutes of continuously walking down the stairs, and not only were Jay and I confused, but our grandfather was furious. He was tired after the first minute of stairs, and now he was yelling at Jay and I like we were pulling something over him and making him walk down more stairs. The whole time it seemed like the rest of the hotel around us became blurry or smoky. It was surreal. Once we made it to the bottom of the stairs and into the lobby, we thought we were going to be in trouble for taking so long, but everyone acted like it hadn't been long at all. Our grandfather seemed completely different too. He wasn't angry anymore, nor was he tired. Jay and I spoke for a while on the car ride home, and he seemed to feel the same way. That the stairs kept on going and that the surroundings became blurry. Was it supernatural? A glitch in the Matrix? To this day, I'm still not sure what happened that evening at the Omni Grove Park Inn. I was about 6. Every time my best friend slept over, it would happen. I've tried to explain it away as a recurring nightmare, but there's just no way. To this day, my dreams don't make any sense. People, places, and things all look different in my dreams. It's very clearly not reality. But this dream was perfect. I would be in my room. Every detail would be exactly the same. The teddy bear wallpaper, my knickknacks, everything. I'd wake up in the middle of the night in my room. It would be dark. I'd look around and notice the shadows on the walls looked like shadows of forest animals. I'd try to figure out what objects in my room were making these perfect shadows, and as soon as I'd come to the realization, there was nothing in the room that could possibly cast these shadows on the wall, and they would slowly blink, opening their glowing red eyes. Then they'd peel off the wall like you'd peel a sticker label off a box. They'd hop off the wall and run over to me to kick and bite me. I could never remember how it ended. I'd just wake up the next morning. I don't know why, but I never told my parents about it. It happened so many times, but I never told anyone. I was young, so I didn't have the idea to check for bruises the next day, but I was a clumsy kid, so I was covered in them anyway. I don't experience sleep paralysis, but I do occasionally wake up in the hypnopompic state to see a giant shadow spider crawling across my pillow, and that's terrifying. A few years ago, my then 2-year-old son woke up screaming from his nap. This was normal for him, by the way. He had a very limited vocabulary at this point, but he managed to describe sleep paralysis complete with Hat Man to me. There's no way he could have known about the Hat Man at that age. But he told me about him. That was the proof I needed. Shadow entities are real. I've heard that they haunt generations of families. Well, as I was explaining his experience, and my childhood experience to my mum, she admitted to me that she sees shadow people occasionally. And that's it. I'm a believer for life. In April, I was in a traumatic rollover accident. I'm lucky I escaped without a scratch. It was the scariest thing to ever happen to me. However, when I went back to work, immediately, I know I shouldn't have, I was having what felt like timeline jumps. It felt like I was fighting to stay on my current timeline. I was losing moments of time here and there. One day, my coworker and I were merchandising and cleaning displays. We were literally talking to each other back and forth. I asked her a question and it was silent. I thought, wow, how rude. I looked around and she wasn't even there, though we were in the middle of a conversation. So I thought maybe she decided to take a break and go to the back room, since she wasn't in the lobby or bent down behind the counters. I checked the bathroom, but they were empty. So I went back to doing what I was doing. Then 15 minutes went by, and she still wasn't in the room. So I shout her name as loud as I can, and then she's calmly like, "I'm right here, why are you yelling for me?" I screamed because I was startled. I started having a panic attack and crying because she said that we were talking and she had been in the room the entire time. I said she wasn't. I told her I went to ask her a question and she had just vanished. I was so freaked out I felt insane, but she believed me. My coworker and I could not explain it. She was my passenger in the car when the accident happened too. After going to the doctor, it turned out I had a concussion, but all my scans and everything else was clear and normal. I had a CT as well as an MRI, and this only occurred in the first 3 weeks and hasn't happened since. I used to work at a food spot in the mall. We'd regularly hear loud bangs and screeching sounds coming from behind the walls. We'd always chalk it up to the pipes or maintenance stuff happening after hours. No big deal, just kind of annoying. Even stranger, the computer screens at our stations would occasionally flicker red, and when they did, the timestamps would always glitch to 1:10 a.m., no matter what time of day it actually was. The screen would flash, the clock would read 1:10, then everything would go back to normal. We figured it was just a software bug, whatever. Then came the night that made me never want to close alone again. It had been a busy evening. The mall was packed and we were clearing up, getting ready to shut down. That's when we heard the screeching again, but this time it was different, much louder, like metal tearing open. Then the computer screens flashed and didn't go back. They turned solid red, just a blank, glowing red screen with the same 1:10 a.m. timestamp in the corner. We looked at each other weirded out, but trying to stay calm. I stepped away from the counter and looked out into the mall. It was completely empty. There was not a single person, no sound. All the storefronts were dark, gates pulled down, the overhead lights had dimmed. It was like someone had to hit a switch and the whole place shut down instantly. I turned back to my coworker, her face pale, and just whispered, "What the hell's going on?" We stood frozen, watching. And then just as suddenly as it had started, the screeching stopped. The screens flickered again and returned to normal, the usual menu displayed in the correct time. We both looked outside again, and the mall was full of people. Crowds walking by, stores lit up, music playing. It was like nothing had happened at all. But it did. We've never been able to explain it, and no one else we've talked to has had anything similar happen to them, at least not that they'll admit. But after that night, we both swore we'd never laugh at the screen glitch or pipe noises again. I don't know what happened at 1:10 a.m., and I don't think I ever will, but I'd love to find out more. If anything like this has ever happened to you, please share it with me. I think I'm losing my mind. My mum's friend that lived in a subdivision down the street made a post on Facebook that her cat got out and was missing. My mum, sister and I volunteered to help find him, so we hopped in the car and started driving around her subdivision looking for him. It was October the 4th, 2012, around 10 p.m, and very dark out with a thunderstorm in the distance. We were driving on the right side of the road, and on the left side of the road a little girl appeared out of nowhere. She appeared to be around 6 years old and had no legs, amputated just above the knee, with lightish skin and dark hair and a pink outfit. She was rolling herself down the middle of the other lane in a small wheelchair. She had a very stiff posture and was looking straight ahead and didn't acknowledge our car or shield her eyes from our bright headlights. We were both going in opposite directions, so we passed each other rather quickly. There was a moment of silence right after we all saw her, each of us questioning our sanity for a moment. Then we started freaking out a little. My mum quickly turned the car around and we drove back down the street, and the little girl was nowhere to be seen. We were a bit freaked out but ended up continuing our search for the cat. We didn't see anyone else around that entire night. We ended up finding the cat yowling at another cat behind some bushes, and when we returned him to my mum's friend, we told her what happened, and she said she's never seen any little girl matching that description in her subdivision. A few days ago, I made a post on my town's Facebook page reciting this encounter and asking people who lived in that specific area of the subdivision if a little girl in a wheelchair lived there. So far, no one can recall ever seeing a little girl in a wheelchair in the area. I just can't imagine someone letting their 6-year-old in a wheelchair cruise down the street at 10 o'clock at night with no adult supervision. I've searched for old articles involving missing girls or deaths in the area and came up empty. This town is pretty small, so if anything happened around here it would have been big, and everyone would have known about it. However, I suppose some acts can start in one place and end in another, and not all are uncovered immediately. There's an abandoned mountain bike circuit that winds through the woods a few miles from where I live. It used to be part of a small outdoor recreation park before the funding dried up and the land was left to rot. What's left is a looping dirt track carved into the hillside with banked turns, steeps and descents. Late one night, 2 friends and I decided to explore it. We knew the area technically wasn't open anymore, so we waited until everything around us was completely quiet. Before leaving, I checked an old trail map online to refresh my memory of the layout. It was a large loop, with 2 long downhill stretches on opposite sides of the hill, and 4 major turns connecting them. We entered from the lower trailhead to the eastern side, and started walking the loop counterclockwise. The forest swallowed most of the moonlight, and the only clear shapes were the pale ribbon of the trail and the silhouettes of trees on both sides. Near the second berm, high on the northern slope, we noticed a strange trail marker. Someone had stacked several flat stones in a deliberate spiral right in the middle of the track, not something riders would normally leave behind. We stopped there for a bit, sitting on the sloped edge of the berm and talking quietly. One of my friends sets his bike gloves down beside the stone spiral while adjusting his backpack. After a few minutes we continued on, following the trail as it dipped into a long, downhill section. The grade was obvious. We could feel the slope in our legs, and the trees thinned slightly as the truck curved around the hillside. We passed the 3rd turn and followed the trail towards what should have been the southern stretch of the loop. And that's when we saw it again. Another berm came into view, and in the center of it sat the same stone spiral. Not something similar. The same pattern, the same flat stones, the same uneven gaps. Next to it was the bike glove. The same one my friend had left behind earlier. We all stopped at once. There was no arguing about where we were. The elevation was different. The slope we just walked down didn't exit near the first marker. The trail map had shown only one long downhill before this point, and we had followed it exactly. There was no way we had double-backed. There were no intersections or shortcut trails. The loop design made that impossible. The mood shifted instantly. What had felt like a quiet adventure now felt off. We turned around and walked back the way we came, this time paying obsessive attention to every bend and incline, afraid if we stopped thinking about it, the ground might just shift again. When I got home, I pulled up the trail map and satellite image. The stone spiral shouldn't have existed at all, but even assuming someone had built it, there was only one berm where it could have been placed. The section where we saw it the second time was bare dirt on the map. To this day, none of us can explain how a single object appeared in two separate locations along a trail with no crossovers in the middle of nowhere with no one else around. We all remembered the slopes and turns. I haven't gone back since. Every time I pass the trailhead, I get unsettling feelings that if I follow it long enough, I might not come back. Growing up, whenever I wanted candy, I'd always go to the same store to the corner of my house. It was run by a really nice couple. They weren't from the States, I'm not entirely sure where they were from. They've long since moved. But it was always nice to go in there, and the candy was quite cheap. This story happened after I'd been going there for a few years, just a few months before they packed up and moved elsewhere, in fact. I must have been no more than 12. I had just taken my allowance, my parents weren't home, and I walked myself over to the store. It wasn't far by any means. I made my way in and heard the familiar bell jingle over my head as I walked through. I started looking around, trying to see what I wanted to buy. I had a handful of coins in my pocket, and I took a few of them out because I wanted to make sure I had enough to buy the candies I wanted. But then at that moment, a few coins fell to the ground. And as you can probably guess, a few of the coins fell underneath the shelves. I quickly threw my remaining coins into my pocket and dived onto the ground, looking desperately if I could find my missing coins underneath the shelves. I looked with my eyes, but there wasn't a lot of room. My hand was just thin enough to start scraping the dust and debris away until I could find my missing coins. My entire focus was just on that, the coins. I pulled my hand away when I was sure I had retrieved the last of the coins, and as I stood up, I felt a weird sensation, almost like dizziness. And when I was wiping the dust on my shorts, did I blink in confusion? Because I no longer appeared to be in this store at all. I now appeared to be in a living room. I looked around, absolutely terrified. Had I somehow crawled my way into their home or something? I didn't really know what to say, or what to do in that moment, but just blinked stupidly. One thing I can tell you for certain, though, is that I remember grabbing my coins and trying to wipe the dust off them, and I could see the dust fall from the coin and land on this clean floor. Then, not a moment after the dust hitting the floor and me witnessing it, did something happen, and suddenly I was back, standing in the shop again. I look around. I try and move forward and back and everything feels normal. And then I look down to where the dust must have fallen, but there's nothing there. It was the strangest sensation I have ever witnessed. I'm not entirely sure how to describe it, and until I found these kind of stories did I find the right people to share it with. If anyone has any explanation for what this could have been, I'd love to hear it. Even though people say it could have been in my mind, I'll tell you this for certain. There's no way that dust, which was quite a considerable chunk, wouldn't have been visible if it had hit the floor of the store. I know for a fact, wherever I went, a piece of stray dust from underneath the shop went there, and it probably stayed. I had a back injury from an old job and was going to physical therapy. My mum was driving me to and from appointments. The office was only about 10 minutes from our house. On the drive back we were yapping, and a car almost T-boned us through an intersection. It was a close call and shook us up pretty bad. But there were some crazy drivers every day, so we just went back to yapping like usual. We distinctly remember taking the left back on the main road near our house, but in the distraction of conversation didn't realize we somehow ended up on the other side of town, like a completely different side of town. We would have had to have taken a right and several side roads to get to the stoplight we were on when we noticed, and we began freaking out hard about how we got to that road, and I was just in too much pain to try and understand the process, and we'll try and retrace our steps later. The insanely bizarre thing is we made it home in the 10 minutes it would have usually taken us with the normal route, and it physically wasn't possible to get from the doctor's office to that side of town and then back home in that short a space of time. It felt like time or reality glitched. When I was a kid, my brother, cousins and I spent a lot of time at my grandparents' house. It was an older home, 2 stories with a basement. The adults would sit in the living room or kitchen for hours talking, and we'd be sent off to play in the spare rooms or the den at the back of the house. Even though it was one house, certain parts always felt different. The back hallway that led to the basement door was quieter. The lighting was softer there, and as a kid I couldn't explain it, but I always felt like stepping into a slightly separate part of the house. The basement door was at the end of the hallway. It opened to a narrow wooden staircase that went straight down into a large storage basement. My grandparents kept decades worth of things down there: boxes, old toys, furniture, family keepsakes, holiday decorations and antiques. It wasn't messy, just full, like a preserved timeline of their lives. One afternoon we were playing hot and cold with an old silver dollar we found in one of the hallway drawers. It was heavier than normal coins and had a dull shine that made it feel important. None of us knew where it came from, but it looked old, maybe even older than the house, and that made it more exciting to us. While my cousin was hiding it, she dropped it. We heard it hit the hardwood floor with a sharp metallic clink and watched it roll in a perfect arc straight under the basement door. I was closest, so I opened the door to grab it. The basement light was already on, I clearly remember that. And there was a man, standing at the bottom of the stairs. He wasn't moving, just standing there halfway turned, like he'd been in the middle of doing something. He had several items in his arms, a small wooden box that looked like an old radio, and something wrapped in a cloth. I didn't recognize him. He wasn't a neighbor, he wasn't family. He didn't look confused or startled to see me, but just irritated. And the moment our eyes met, his expression hardened and he shouted, "Go back upstairs, kid. Go!" I wasn't panicked. It wasn't the voice of someone caught breaking in. It sounded like a command, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I slammed the door and ran. I didn't even think about the coin. I bolted down the hallway into the living room and told my parents there was a man in the basement. My dad immediately went to check. He and my uncle searched the basement top to bottom. There was no one there. No windows open, no broken locks, no disturbed dust near the small basement window. Nothing missing. No footprints or sound of someone running. The basement light was off when they went down. They told me I must have imagined it. Except my brother and cousin were right behind me when I opened the door. They didn't see him directly. They were a few steps back. But they all heard the man yell. All of us describe the same tone to this day, sharp and annoyed. Years passed, and the story became one of those "remember when you scared yourself" family anecdotes that the family dismissed. Well, about 5 years later, both of my grandparents passed away. My dad and I were helping clear out the basement. This time I was older, old enough to really take in the space. And almost immediately, my dad started noticing things missing. Specific antiques, certain collectibles my grandpa used to show us, a few old radios, some storage boxes that were definitely supposed to be there. No one in the family remembers them being sold or given away. There were no records and no explanations. Standing down there, I got this overwhelming feeling of déjà vu, like I had stood in that exact spot before, just from a different angle. And this is the part I never really know how to explain. The man didn't act like a burglar. He didn't look surprised or drop anything, he didn't try to run. He looked inconvenienced. For years I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone had found a way in. Maybe he had escaped in the 2 minutes before my dad got downstairs. But here's what bothers me. The basement light was on when I opened the door. It was off when my dad went down. Yet no one remembers turning it off. And the coin? We never found it. It wasn't under the door where my dad checked, and it wasn't on the stairs. It wasn't anywhere in the basement at all. Sometimes I wonder if that silver dollar didn't belong to our house at all. Sometimes I wonder if, for a few seconds, that basement staircase didn't lead to our basement. What if it led somewhere different? And if the man wasn't stealing from my grandparents, what if it was his own basement in another version of our house, and I was the one who suddenly appeared at the top of his stairs? And in that moment we both saw something that we really shouldn't have. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you have enjoyed our paranormally glitch in the matrix, glitch in reality kind of stories. I always am fascinated by these tales, and if you would like to hear even more of them, you can follow me and subscribe and do all the good stuff. I'd like to give one extra special thanks to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen for their continued support of the channel. It really means a hell of a lot, guys, and goes a long, long way. So thank you. But that's it from me, guys. I will see you again soon. Stay awesome, and good night.